You're listening to Cards to the Moon, a podcast about trading cards from both a collector and investor perspective. We hope you'll stick around for the ride as we take a deep dive into the state of the hobby, share some hot takes, hopefully some useful advice, and fun stories along the way. Hey guys, welcome back to Cards to the Moon. This is episode 269, and my name is Clark from 5cardguys.com and 5cardguys on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I'm on pretty much every platform. Co-hosting with me as usual is Hyung of Integrity Sports Cards. John's away for the next couple of episodes, but hopefully he'll be back again to join us next week. All right, today we're going to play a joint podcast I did with Paul Hickey. We talk about several different topics within the half hour that we had together. That includes when to choose the rarity of the card over the grade of the card. You know, we used my Mike Trout card as an example, so that was an interesting discussion. I also asked him about when is it a good time generally to target quarterbacks in the offseason, especially, you know, with every team out as of this recording, except of course the Chiefs and the Eagles, who are in the Super Bowl this Sunday. We also touch on the Paul Skenes 1/1 MLB Debut Patch Card. And I didn't expect the conversation to go where it went, but I think it was an important topic to address. And it dealt with the whole element of gambling in the hobby and young collectors getting more involved in ripping packs, right? Obviously, the discussion came about because an 11-year-old was the one that pulled the Skenes 1/1. But yeah, take a listen, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that particular subject as well. All right, before we play that joint pod though, this is really the first opportunity for our pod, Cards to the Moon, to chime in about the whole backyard breaks controversy. I don't really want to rehash all the details because by now it's all over social media, and I'm sure you've heard all the details already. But TLDR, in case you didn't, Grant Telford, one of the owners of Backyard Breaks, in one of his live streams breaking, I believe it was basketball cards, he made some off-the-cuff, inappropriate remarks regarding what he'd allow with his hypothetical young daughter. Yes, it's weird. That, of course, produced a huge backlash within the hobby, with some calling for a complete ban of Backyard Breaks on the Whatnot platform, as well as any other card companies, including Fanatics, to stop doing business with them. Grant's Whatnot account was suspended some days later, but the company, Backyard Breaks, their account is still operational, I believe. So some are speculating, of course, it's because they bring in so much revenue to Whatnot that essentially Whatnot is making a business decision to let Backyard Breaks continue to break on their platform. Others note that Grant and Backyard Breaks, they violated Whatnot's zero tolerance policy on sexualizing minors and therefore should be banned immediately. Even some non-hobby accounts are covering this story, including Barstool. One of the guys from Barstool they were just saying that this guy Grant, his remarks were just weird, plain weird, and it'll be hard for him to come back from this one. Speaking of which, Grant did apologize on IG, saying he needs to do better and will be taking time away to ponder what he's done. It's pretty standard corporate generic response. Now, I wonder, I guess that wasn't a TLDR, that was a lot of information there, but a lot's happened since the story broke. But I wonder if we could just talk more about what happens next, or should happen next, or what we think will be, you know, the fallout of something like this. You know, what kind of impact essentially do we think an incident like this will have on the hobby, right? Do we take this take this as an opportunity to make the hobby more inclusive, especially for females? Should companies connected with Backyard Breaks need to take more of a stand? What are your thoughts after this whole thing that's just, over the last couple of weeks have exploded in our social media?
To be honest, Clark, I really haven't had any thoughts other than, trying to like I don't like the drama regardless. That's why I kind of don't even consume hobby content. I show up here because it's fun to talk about sports cards, and then when we talk about certain issues. But this thing came up, and I started just kind of like, oh, this one's not going to end well. But
Right.
at the end of it, like I said, it's something out of my control. But I think Whatnot needs to police their policy, obviously. But like you going back to kind of what you said, it's like I don't know if like you mentioned like putting like inclusivity, all these policing, like it starts becoming tough because obviously it's more of a moral issue than anything, right? It's not necessarily sports card like specific, right? It just happens. Right. And I guess there's a negative lens if it's leaking out into Barstool and to the mainstream media, because you don't want to be known for, you know, that kind of behavior, obviously. So it's a tricky, sticky situation. And like I said, it shows you that there are good people in the hobby at the end of the day, and it's all perspective, right? So that's why I don't try to get involved. It's like I can only control what I can control. And it's like I like we voice our opinions every day here, and that's only, you know, I'm liable for that, really. And other than that, it's like, yeah, I think whatever, it's almost like citizen's arrest.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like
Sure.
I mean, it's going to happen. He's going to probably, you know, get what is coming to him for those comments, right? Whatever that is, right? So, yeah.
No, for sure. I think, you know, like to obviously a much lesser degree, but kind of the same response when things like this happen in the hobby. Remember his sports card therapist when he got caught for essentially shill bidding his own, the card that he wanted. And then the backlash was so severe, we still haven't seen Rob, the sports card therapist. Yeah, he's long gone.
Well, and it's that card porn account too, right? That we always bring up. So it's like,
right,
reoccurring.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's and I think again, and we talked about CT scanning a couple of weeks ago, and you know, like there's this element that because the hobby has a lot of passionate collectors and they want it to be a certain way, you know, right. There is this automatic self-policing involved, which is a good thing, you know, because it does filter out a lot of the bad stuff, and there are consequences to people's actions, especially now that we're seeing the backlash. That's part of the consequence. And, you know, like as a person, I hope the guy learns, you know, like I'm not in the camp where let's ban him forever and never talk about him again.
Yeah.
I think his apology was, like I said, was pretty standard and corporate. I don't really know if he's really believes that, but I feel like those kind of things take time. And I wrote this in the recent newsletter that I send out every week about, you know, I was actually not quoting, but there was Kentucky basketball cards on IG. He has a pretty big account, and he said he believes in both consequences and grace equally, right? And I think I'm aligned with him on that. You know, there's always consequences for your action, and you need to pay it
for sure.
Whether it's
right,
you know,
it's a balance.
Hobby justice exactly. But I also believe in grace, and I think that takes time though. Like you just can't say sorry and then things are all good. You have to show it through your actions as well, and then you know, if you really are remorseful for anything you've done, not just this issue, you almost have to show it through your actions and through consistency, you know, and then I think that's going to take time. And who knows what's going to happen? Like, I have no idea. I think it was pretty clear to me, at least, when I saw the Whatnot zero tolerance policy. If you have something like this,
you got to stick with it.
You got to, or you start losing credibility.
100%. Right? And it only takes one other company that sees that opportunity, that stands up for, you know, what they believe in. And if Whatnot doesn't respond in that manner, and their focus is not bettering the hobby, because you got to remember, if it's profit over bettering the hobby, that stuff will be exposed. Because when a situation like this occurs, now you have to make a decision. It's like, well, are you doing it for the best of the hobby, or are you doing it for profit? And and there's consequences to that. So, and you know, obviously we're not in control of those actions, but at the end of the day, we would probably do that as Whatnot if we owned it, but we don't.
Yes.
So it's like
Right.
we really can't, say anything.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm aligned. Like, yeah, if we were running Whatnot, we'd be like, this is our policy. We have to enact it to, not lose face. And then it's more about short-term versus long-term benefit, right?
100%.
Short-term, you're gonna get hit in the pocketbook for sure if you ban one of your huge accounts. But I don't necessarily agree with like people that are loud about like this is what should happen and that and this and this. Like, I think we can all agree that the comments and remarks were inappropriate and some people will say disgusting and all that's true. But yeah, everyone has a different opinion of how things should be resolved, right?
Yeah,
and that's kind of.
I think every individual should be aware of that. It's like, yes, we're not denying that all those allegations aren't true. It's just you have the choice to respond with what you want to, and there's consequences to that too, right? So it's like if you feel that's your game and that's where you need to be, then do that to the best of your ability.
Yeah, no, it's and again, like there's so many different opinions, and like people like to stay on it, and that's fine too. If this is something you want to champion and keep in the forefront, and you believe that there will be some actionable account, all the power to you as well. But going back to the individual level of things, like sometimes it's just like it's easy for us not to pay attention and not to worry about it because we've never broke with backyard breaks. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's
true.
a lot of people like we're just so separated from it anyways. So maybe it is more important for people that are in the breaking industry. I'm sure it's another level of concern, right, for them. So I understand that as well. So like for me, I'm trying to have this wider perspective on like, yeah, for different people, there's different impacts, whether it's stronger or weaker. And I think everyone's responding accordingly to how much they're impacted by it.
For sure.
And for like, I understand females, collectors being more really vocal about it because obviously that's something that is addressing a lot of the issues within the hobby for them. But there's so many different angles and so many, different ways to look at it. But just kind of keeping that perspective, I guess.
Yeah, no, I like I said, that's a healthy perspective, and I encourage people to, see the way they see fit because everybody doesn't have the same perspective. But like for me, it's all about, I'm excited to see where the hobby continues to grow and goes. And it's just like, okay, what can we do? If that's an issue, what can we do to make sure stuff like that doesn't happen without overstepping even the boundaries on the other side, right? Where it's like, you can't start policing, like, it's just the dangers of even like, the whole cardboard thing. It's like they were the watchdogs, but what if the watchdogs were corrupted? It's great to see, at the end of the day, people have morals, people will stand up for what they believe in. And maybe that's the lesson to be learned or whatever it is. It's at the end of the day, can you take away whatever positivity from this? Because you can't really control the outcome, really. What happened and it's like, how do we respond from this?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'll end off with this. Yeah, I agree with just in a way it's encouraging to see the backlash. Like people didn't just shrug it off.
Right,
like
exactly.
Of course it was something that needed to be addressed, and it was addressed.
Yeah.
And so like I'm glad to see that, and obviously you don't want to see just that become the norm, right? Where it's like, oh, it's just those guys, like. So I feel like it's been addressed. I feel like, of course, more can be done, and I think more will be done. Right. But but there are things that ultimately, I guess, what Topps or Fanatics they do or might not do is really up to the leadership of that company.
Right, and there's consequences there.
Yeah, and as a podcast, hobby podcast, we'll if things develop, of course we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's why we're talking about it now, because we normally we probably wouldn't spend so much time on controversies like this. We like to talk about the cards themselves, but at the same time we understand we're a podcast. We talk about hobby news. This is hobby news, so that's why we felt we needed to address it at some point. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I have no idea how things are going to shake out, but I think at least there's a spotlight on it. And I think that's a great first step. And then, we'll see. All right, let's play that. It's a rough segue. We're going to play the joint pod that I had with Paul Hickey. I recorded a couple weeks ago. And then, we'll have a brand new episode for you next Tuesday. All right, Clark here from Cards to the Moon, and of course I'm here also with Paul Hickey of the Sports Card Strategy Show for another joint pod. Good to see you again this week.
What's up? Good to see you, Clark.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our little discussion that I wanted to really ask you the last time we were recording, which was a couple weeks ago. So it's kind of a continuation from our discussion on that pod. And if you remember, we were talking about cracking a card out of a non-PSA slab and then resubmitting to PSA in hopes of getting a better grade or an equivalent PSA grade in order to increase the overall value of the card. So if people are lost with what I just said, I'll give you the quick example. If you had a BGS or Beckett graded 9.5 Gem Mint card and you cracked it out and you got a PSA 10, all of a sudden your card in a PSA 10 slab is worth a lot more because there's a premium on PSA 10 slab cards. Now, I wanted to add a little twist to this scenario, and so here it is. If you found a card in a PSA 10 slab which costs, let's say, $1,000, just to keep things simple, but then you can also find the same card except it's a numbered parallel, so it's a little more rare, but it's in a BGS 9 or even a BGS 9.5 slab, and it also costs $1,000. Now, I know what you're thinking. You can always buy the BGS slab and crack it out, hoping for a PSA 10. But let's say for this example, you don't crack it out because maybe it just doesn't look like you'll get a PSA 10, right? So you keep it in its BGS case. I'm wondering, in this scenario, which would you rather buy as an investment? Do you lean more toward the rarity of a card, the lower numbered parallel, or the grade of a card, the higher number parallel or even the base, but it's a PSA 10 versus a BGS 9?
I think it's a great question. I mean, I'm going to give you a real answer, but I would always say it depends on the card first.
Sure.
So I think with all the millions of cards out there, it definitely depends on the card. But let's say, I mean, can I throw out like a card example that I'm thinking of right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say like a Victor Wembanyama Topps Chrome refractor PSA 10.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Versus a Victor Wembanyama Topps Chrome serial numbered, say blue refractor, I think out of 150.
Mm-hmm.
In like a PSA 9, right? Is that kind of what you're...
Sure, yeah. Yeah, that could work too, yeah.
Okay, so I think people grade cards for different reasons. And one reason that I grade cards, and I encourage my listeners at the Sports Card Strategy Show to grade cards, is because it creates rarity. So rarity then helps determine value and, in theory, increases desirability of the card. So in this case, they're both have similar rarity, right? I mean, like the PSA 10 gives the base refractor some scarcity, but yet we know there's only 150 of the blue. So I think both are fairly equal cards in that regard. And I would definitely not care too much about the grade of the PSA 9 blue refractor. I think what it comes down to me is price versus what I perceive the market value to be in the future.
Yeah.
So if I can get, all things equal, I may go after the blue out of 150 just because I know that there's only going to be maximum 150 of those. And so I do think, say 150 or out of 499. I know you're a baseball guy, and I know the Bowman first auto refractors are out of 499. I think that's another great example of a card where you can go after the out of 499 and in a PSA 9 versus the base auto in a PSA 10.
Right.
The out of 499 PSA 9 might do better because of the same reason that we're talking about. So if you can get the serial numbered card and it's still in a PSA 9, let's be honest, it's still a high grade. Or I know you said BGS 9. BGS 9 also, that's still a high grade. Yeah. And like BGS, you can see the subgrades. Yeah. So I like that you can see the subgrades in a BGS. I think, our previous discussion talked about a crack and submit play. I think these, you don't necessarily have to crack them out and submit them. I think like BGS 9, PSA 9, SGC 9.5, CGC 9.5 in the say Bowman Chrome First Prospect Auto Refractor out of 499 is just as good of a card, if not better, than the PSA 10 base auto. Is that kind of what you were hoping to get out of this?
No, I appreciate that insight, and that's a great example. And I love what you said about, the PSA 10 creating a level of scarcity. And I think an important distinction to make is also whether these PSA 10 cards versus PSA 9 with the rare parallel a card is from the modern era or from the vintage, or even the early 2000s when they didn't print as many cards. So if you're thinking about the modern cards, like even Victor Wembanyama, obviously he'd be in the modern era, and you got a PSA 10 of a base, you just don't know how many more PSA 10s there will be in the near future, because I'm sure there's a lot more. People are trying to grade these base cards to get that PSA 10 value. Whereas, part of the reason why I bring this up is because I think this is the first time I'm mentioning on air, even before my own podcast on Cards to the Moon. But I sold my PSA 9 base of the Mike Trout first Bowman Chrome Auto for about $4,500 USD, and that was and it kind of ties in with the crack and resubmit because it was in a BGS 9 and I got it up to a PSA 9. We talked about that for sure a couple weeks ago. But then when I sold the PSA 9 after the upgrade, I bought a BGS 9.5 of the Mike Trout first Bowman Chrome, but a refractor number to 500. So for me in that case, the BGS 9.5 versus the PSA 9 of the base, I rather have the numbered version because I know there's only going to be 500 of those, and there's going to be even rare gem mint cards of that refractor numbered to 500 versus the base, which, is still a nice card in a PSA 9 because I don't think there's going to be that many more PSA 9 or 10s graded of Mike Trout because it's a 2009 card. But that's what I mean by whether it's from the modern era or even if you're looking back 10, 20 years. Just be mindful, I guess, of the pop count overall. But
that's a great point. And since you mentioned that, I will say I've been going after these Michael Jordan star cards from 1986, and I actually picked up a couple of them from 1985. And like 1985 Michael Jordan, this is the number 2 card, all rookie first team in a BGS 7 with a 9.5 centering subgrade, 2 9 subgrades, and then a surface 6.
Right.
So it's just to your point, the further back you go, I mean, this is a 7. So but it's the card that makes it, and it's less about the grade. But I do I think the further back you go, I'm learning to like BGS more because of the subgrades, because you can start to understand why it got the grade. And like 9.5 centering, you're like, oh, this is a 7, but also you learn that other hobbyists like this more because of the 9.5 centering, and you learn that's kind of cool too with like the vintage cards. So going back in time and picking up these star 85 and 86 cards, and another example is this. I got this PSA 6 of his 1985 star rookie of the year. It's card number 1 from that set, and it's in a PSA 6. But if you look at comps for just this card in general in any grade, they're all over the place. And I was able to, I didn't pay $1,600 cash. I did a lot of trades at a card show recently, and was able to basically move into most of these Michael Jordan cards kind of even for trades. And so, nice. But I mean, $1,600 trade value essentially. I did pay cash, but I got the cash from trading other cards. So $1,600 cash at a show, and comps on this are all over the place. Even higher. People are paying even more for like grades that are under this 6. And so
interesting.
It's very interesting. Since you mentioned vintage and the further back you go,
Right.
it does get totally different than the ultra modern stuff in terms of grades and pricing and all that.
Yeah, and I'll add one more too, because you just reminded me of BGS grades for not just vintage cards, but in particular for baseball cards back in the 2000 and 2010s, early on. There were, and I still believe BGS is still well regarded in the baseball card collecting space, more so than the other sports, in my opinion, and definitely more so than what it is now. You know, everyone's submitting to PSA now, and you see the gem rate data. You know, BGS is kind of falling off a cliff. But back then, BGS was the grading company to send your baseball cards to. So I think if you look back, even during those Mike Trout years or even earlier, those BGS graded cards are pretty nice to, you know, explore and do your research on, because there could be really good flip opportunities there as well.
Yeah, 100%. So for any of you who haven't heard our episode where we talk about crack and submit, you got to go. You can find it on Cards to the Moon or on Sports Card Strategy Show. You should go check that out for sure. Awesome.
All right. So the next topic that I want to discuss with you, because you know, you're more of the football card guy, and we've established early on when we started doing these together, we're more baseball. So I always like to take advantage of your brain here. And the question is, you know, we just have 2 teams remaining, right? And as of this recording, there's you know, we're a week and a half out of the Super Bowl, and so there's, you know, the 2 QBs standing are, of course, Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. Now my question is about all the other QBs that made a good run but didn't quite make it all the way. You know, like your Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud in particular. So I would suspect their prices to generally start coming down, because of, you know, there probably was this initial playoff bump to begin with, because, you know, you never know, they could go all the way. So my question is, when when would you typically say the best buying opportunity is for these QBs? Like, how much would you wait into the off season to pick up some of these guys if you're still a believer in the talent?
That's a great question. So what I like to do to answer this is look back at the guys who lost in the conference championships or the divisional round or even the wild card round a year ago, and then maybe even go back a couple years. And what I learned when I do that is those guys were actually, like, Jalen Hurts was one of them last year, even though he's in the Super Bowl this year. But their prices really continue to fall all the way into June. And so when you look at the charts, they start to rise again in July, and they go up through August if the player performs really, really well in week 1, like one of the top individual performers and their team wins in week 1 and week 2, their prices might sort of crescendo there, but then they kind of are susceptible to the mid-season dip, which happens like at the end. It actually starts towards the end of September, early October, but it really takes shape in like late November through Christmas. But so that's kind of the overall timeline. But to answer your question, the best time to buy them based on historical data, assuming, and we'll talk about Jade. We're gonna let's take Jaden Daniels and leave him out of the conversation, and we'll come back. And I think you probably know why, but we'll break it down for everybody. So if it's a non-rookie, so if it's not Jaden Daniels, you can go back and you can get a full year of historical data, and you can see, okay, when did this player's cards dip the most? In general, it's going to be March and June, because really March for these guys, there's nothing going on. They're not really in the news cycle unless there's a big free agent signing, say at wide receiver. Maybe like the coaching changes will all be over. They'll all be done because basically most of them have happened already. And certainly the last few things to take shape in terms of coaching changes and offensive coordinator changes and stuff will happen right after the Super Bowl. So when you get into March, people are focused on the NFL draft. People are focused on those prospects. And so we want you buying players when they're out of the news cycle. And that's typically when their pricing dips. So that March window, things start to heat up a little bit for the guys, even the quarterbacks, the veteran quarterbacks that we're talking about. Because when the NFL draft happens, everyone just starts buying football. So you're probably wondering why March and June. Well, it's really because NFL cards start to heat up again in April around the draft. And then May, there's a lot of news around it as well. So, but June, there's like a dead period before training camp actually starts. So March and June are historically the best time to buy these guys cards. And really we're looking at, I would say not necessarily higher pop count cards, but cards that have enough sales data. So typically the best cards to look at for guys would be like their Optic Hollow PSA 10s, their Prism Silver PSA 10s. You're going to get enough sales data there to feel confident, sort of like quote unquote buying the dip on those guys. Do you have a guess or a take before I give you my Jaden Daniels reason why we left him out?
I mean, I think you might have mentioned it. Like for me, the hype was so huge on Jaden Daniels, and to your point, it was his rookie season, believe it or not. So I think that had something to do with it. But yeah,
100%. It looks so. If you look at C.J. Stroud last year,
right,
and if you look at Brock Purdy the year before, and if you look at Trevor Lawrence the year before that, and then of course Burrow and Herbert, Hurts, Tua, and even believe it or not, it's kind of funny because Jordan Love, but also Davis Mills was in 2020. You had so much hype around, not only because of the hype around them being rookies. So you're going to see Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams with the new head coach in Chicago, Ben Johnson, coming from Detroit. You're going to see Michael Penix hype. You're going to see JJ McCarthy hype. I would caution everyone against buying any rookie quarterback until all of their rookie cards have hit the market, because CJ Stroud, if you remember, he was the hottest quarterback throughout all of last season. His prices were rising, or at least staying steady through August. And then in August, a couple things happened. Number one, the hype wore off because there were new rookies, which is what we were just talking about. But number two, the biggest point I want to make here is that Topps Composite Football came out, and that massively increased his supply. And so you will see whether or not there's another Topps release like that for Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams and all the guys I just mentioned. You will see even their Panini supply will increase. Prism Football just came out, but you're still going to have Optic. You're still going to have National Treasures. You're still going to have a bunch of other releases. So, and then probably you'll have some Topps releases that will feature those guys as well. And whether or not those will have licensing, we saw what happened to CJ Stroud. Like CJ Stroud had, I think, around 9,000 different rookie cards in August. And then I think he had over 20,000 rookie cards after Topps Composite came out. And that's, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, that's like different rookie cards. That's not pop count. So then you multiply the print run of each of those by the 20,000 roughly that CJ Stroud. And so I actually think that, CJ Stroud didn't play as well this year. He wasn't the hot rookie, but I think a bigger factor is actually his supply increased so much and his demand maybe stayed the same or came down. Well, even if Jaden Daniels keeps his demand, his supply is going to increase, so his prices are going to go down. Gotcha. So I would say do not buy any of those rookie quarterbacks until after all of their supply hits the market. And then do the other thing we talked about in our last collab was what happens when a new release comes out. You go back a couple years and buy those guys. So maybe buy Jaden Daniels in like 2026 or 2027.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. Yeah, thanks for that insight. And even something you said near the beginning of the this question was news like if they attain a number one wide receiver. Like I didn't even think about what kind of news could kind of spike certain prices of QB cards. So yeah, no, that was good to know. And all right, I'll mark March and June on my calendar to see if there's any really interesting QBs to pick up around that time. To end this collaborative joint pod episode, I want to go back to baseball. All right, so this is my comfort zone, and I'm sure you heard the news that the Paul Skenes 1/1 MLB debut patch autograph rookie card was pulled by. There's conspiracies going. I don't know if you heard the conspiracies, whether it was I
haven't heard. Tell me, because I heard like what was like an 8 or 9 year old that pulled it, but what's the
11-year-old,
Okay.
but there's no photos of him, so people are thinking that Topps manufactured this nice heartwarming story. I personally think actual 11-year-old pulled it, and the parents are just being cautious. But what we do know for sure is that it will be auctioned off by Fanatics Collect. We didn't know what was going to happen with it, but the family agreed to auction it off at Fanatics Collect. And I'm just curious, kind of a fun question. If you had pulled the Paul Skenes MLB debut patch, what would you have done with that card? And feel free to be as creative as you can. Like I was thinking maybe I would negotiate with the Pittsburgh Pirates. They had this 30 years worth of seasons tickets on the table. You get to meet Paul Skenes, and there's some other attractive offers as part of that deal. Maybe you renegotiate, because I'm not from Pittsburgh. I know you're not from Pittsburgh, so the season tickets won't do us a lot of good. But maybe I could create a nice story by talking with the Pittsburgh Pirates GM and trying to kind of come in with a deal. But anyway, I'm curious to know what you would have done if you had pulled that monster card.
I like your creativity there. I kind of like. I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's a lot of different maybe levers you could pull if you're the owner of that card, which is kind of cool. Yeah. I think first of all, I'm with you. It's probably true that an 11-year-old pulled it. Before I say what I would do, I'm gonna kind of like a little foreshadowing here. I've had people ask me, friends of mine actually have asked me like what I think of the 11-year-old pulling it. And I would be, if my kid pulled it when they were 11, my kids are a little older than that, but if my kid pulled it when they were 11, I would be, in hindsight, I would be a little bit disappointed, because I feel like it's winning the lottery. It's winning the lottery, and it's a good feel good story that an 11-year-old pulled it. But I take this fiscally responsible adult view on things, and I say, okay, if you look at anyone who's ever won the lottery, literally, like they're a mess. They're a complete mess.
Right.
And so I almost wouldn't want my kid to pull like a $3 or $4 million card. I mean, I think I don't know what you think it is, but I think it's it's a multi-million-dollar card. Like,
yeah, at least a mil.
I mean, at least a mil. So maybe it's not 3 or 4 mil, but it's probably, it may be pushing 2, between 1 and 2. So what I would do if I pulled it, or if my son or daughter pulled it, is I would immediately auction it off and put the money in some kind of account. If my kids pulled it, I would put it in an account for them. If I would, and I would probably try to hide from them how much money we got for it, if I could, if that was possible. That might not even be possible, just because I would want them to live their lives, normal lives, because I think people who win the lottery most of the time become complete idiots, and they go down this downward spiral. Now that's my whole little like rant about that. But this is back to cards here. I don't know. Like, I think you get more money from Golden. I know Fanatics Collect does a good job with, like, they give their buyer. I know that they incentivize people auctioning big cards with them by letting them have some of the premium as well. So I believe they let the seller have a certain percentage of the buyer's premium, and they make their money off of a percentage of the buyer's premium. So I know that Fanatics Collect does a good job incentivizing sellers because of that.
Yeah.
But I think Golden has a bigger audience, especially because Golden is now basically has been acquired by eBay. Mm-hmm. So you have like, I mean, we look at the numbers all the time, and you have like 50 to 60 million sports card listings at all time on eBay. And there's no other marketplace that even comes close to that.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying I would auction it off on eBay, but because there's the Golden affiliate, I'd do some research, right, to try to understand like where I should auction it off at. But I'm not as creative as you, but I did have the take of like, I don't love that a kid, this is going to sound really backwards, but I don't love that a kid pulled it, because I think it sets up kids to potentially see that and love the hobby or try to get into the hobby for that. And that's just not realistic. So I want people in the hobby for things that are realistic. Yeah. And it actually like irks me big time when like, I don't like that on social media, really all we talk about are like these big cards and these big pulls. So I'm going to say that I love the card. I love what Topps is doing with the card. And I love that the hobby needs chase cards like that. But I would almost rather see somebody that doesn't need the money. This is going to sound really weird, but I'd rather see somebody that like doesn't even need the money pull the card and then do something where it's like, I'm going to donate this money, or I'm going to do something good for the hobby with this money or something like that. Then even somebody who needs the money, who's a kid, but then it just creates this I think it creates an unhealthy atmosphere around why we should all be in the hobby. And maybe I mean, people can please troll me if you think I'm wrong, and like, let's have a discussion about it. But that's my initial take on it.
No, that's a really interesting take. And I honestly didn't think our discussion would go there, but I'm glad you brought it up because, I do think it requires a deeper conversation. That's for sure. Especially seeing which direction the hobby seems to be going. And we always talk about the hobby can still continue to grow, but along with it are, the cost of the hobby. And to your point, all these different reasons of getting into the hobby now are much more, there's more things to consider, I guess, than there was when we grew up and collecting cards. I guess back then we also wanted to get rich off cards, but the reality wasn't possible with the junk wax era. But now,
and I remember like the $50 David Robinson NBA Hoops rookie was like, that's when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. Like that was the card that I really wanted. And it was only $50. Like it was like, oh my God, $50. I mean, that would be what, like maybe, I don't know, inflation, whatever, but like $200 now.
Sure.
But like, you're not going to change the world with $200.
No.
Like I like that there's the Skenes card and all that. Like, don't get me wrong, but we don't need that for the hobby to be growing and successful and everything. So maybe I should go do some more research, and then we could record a longer episode where we dig deeper into those topics if you ever want to.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Maybe that's a good spot to end today's podcast episode. Get people who are listening to really think about what their take or what their views are on this. And we'd love to hear it from you guys, whether it's Cards to the Moon or the Sports Card Strategy Show. All right.
I love your questions, Clark. You get me thinking in a different direction than especially that last one, but I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Hey, thanks for listening to Cards to the Moon. We'd really appreciate you subscribing to our podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also connect with each of us on Instagram at 5cardguys, or you can follow Hyung at Integrity Sports Cards, or John at TradeU at Recess. You can also check us out at 5cardguys.com. Thanks again, and hope to connect soon.